right. Good afternoon, everybody. How are we doing today? Good. Awesome. Thanks for the introduction, Eric. And I guess I get to lead off here a little bit. So I'm actually going to pick up on kind of the supply chain aspect of this, which is kind of a nebulous term. And I'll be honest with you, I don't really like the word supply chain when we talk about software vendor risk and procurement. Because how many people here, when you think of supply chain, do you think of logistics and materials and stuff like that? A whole bunch of people. So when this whole thing with kind of starting with SolarWinds went down, people are saying, oh, supply chain cybersecurity. I'm like, hold on, what exactly does that mean, right? Are you talking about my logistics providers? Are you talking about my service providers, like those third parties that do remote services for me? What exactly are you talking about? And at this point, it pretty much means everything. So when I get inbound requests for customers that say, hey, we have this company that wants to talk about supply chain risk, I'm like, okay, here we go, right? I have to wait till the first 5 minutes of the meeting to figure out exactly what a part of the supply chain we're talking about. So that's why I wanted to give a little bit of a level set first. So a little bit about me. I worked for GE twice. Went to World Tech Security Technologies when they were starting in the OT cybersecurity realm, which was bought by GE. So I got sucked back into the big meatball. And then came to Synopsys, which if you're familiar with Synopsys, if you design silicon, they make engineering, design, analysis software, but also stepped into the cybersecurity area with things like Black Duck, Coverity, Protocode, Seeker, Defensix, and also bought Cigital, which is ProServe. So I lead the embedded and integrated systems group there. So anything that's not a just random piece of software comes into my group for testing and SDLC analysis, stuff like that. So what Eric had asked me to do is talk about what we're seeing in the industry when it comes to software supply chain or supply chain for systems going into different types of environments. And I'll give you a little bit of what we see coming in there and some of the concerns that are happening in that part of the industry. So we are talking about the supply chain as a provider of systems to end users, right? So software supply chain for, I guess, the OT world, I guess you would say, right? So the best way for me to articulate some of the concerns between the two groups is talking about their personas. So one persona is a consumer or a procurer. Those are the people that are consuming services, products, or software from another party, right? So that service could be, we provide remote support services for one of your pieces of infrastructure. We provide you a piece of software. We provide you your network devices, et cetera. And then you have the producer. They are the people that provide that service. It's a fairly easy distinction, but it comes with different requirements when it comes to what exactly you need as a user of those products or a producer of said products. And the complicated thing is most companies are both. So how many people are kind of OT or IT houses that you would consider yourselves a consumer in here? We have a couple. How many of you also have in-house development? Yeah, so you're also a producer, right? So you have both of those concerns at the same time. And if you're an organization that makes a system, say a GE, a Siemens, Yokogawa, even smaller companies, whoever, you are a consumer of third-party services, even if it's in your IT, and third-party the components that go into your product. And you also have to worry about your product development for what you put out to your customers. What do they need and what do I need to provide? So most people are both. But one of the things I try to do is divide the focus of those two groups in order to help prioritize what you do first. So some of the inbound efforts over the past 18 months, and I would say post-SolarWinds where this really started to pick up. You have to think of cybersecurity not only from the kind of procurement area, but also from the attacker area as the gallery following Tiger Woods around the course, right? Tiger goes to the next hole and blah, 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 all these people kind of follow along. Security attackers and the kind of the industry of what people are asking for follow the same type of model, right? So you see supply chain as a method of getting past our cyber defenses in our organizations. So I use a concept called the M&M model when I talk about cybersecurity. It's a way to get past the crunchy outside of the M&M shell into the chocolatey goodness, which is the inside of your network, which is essentially what those types of attacks end up doing. So our inbound requests are generally on the tactical side, which is, I think I'm a victim. Can you help me? And that comes from either traditional incident response type activities for end users. For the providers, it's a little bit harder because they want to know, did my code base get compromised? And if so, how do I clean it up? These are not easy activities. right? So a lot of the things that we look for as testers in order to figure out if your code has been compromised is normal stuff that software does. It opens network connections, it creates files, it changes permissions, starts processes. So it really takes the person that makes the software to help us kind of figure that out once we give them some points of interest. And also re-looking at vulnerability management. So the vulnerabilities inside my product, what in my product can be used to affect a cyber attack? So that's kind of on the tactical side. And it really, if you look at it as the cybersecurity framework kind of model, where is that person entering the process? Are they on the analysis side where I want to figure out if something can happen to me, or on that kind of tactical response kind of area? From a strategic perspective, we have customers asking, what do we need to do to have this not happen to us? So that's looking at their system development lifecycle. Where are there places where potentially malicious code or an attacker could jump in? Right, so how many people are familiar with the SolarWinds attack? All right, just about everybody. So compromising the build process, putting some malicious functionality there, and as good customers, we get our security update and we deploy it and off we go. We've just introduced something nasty into our environment. So what types of gates do we need to put in place to make sure that doesn't happen? And what type of technology can we use to ensure that it hasn't? So those are kind of the two directions that a lot of our customers are going to. So I'll talk a little bit about Shift Everywhere. So Sammy Miguez is the chief scientist at Synopsys, formerly Assidual. And he uses the concept of Shift Everywhere. How many people have heard Shift Left? Right? We want to push our cybersecurity activities closer to the beginning of the development lifecycle. So the concept now is the shift everywhere. We want to do the cybersecurity things as needed, when they're needed, when it's required. Did I just trigger somebody's automation? That's pretty odd. Anyway, but there's been a lot of shifts in the industry due to some of the supply chain attacks and that are influencing those supply chain attacks. So in a lot of industries, especially in the OT world, open source was pretty much forbidden. Now it's a foundational technology to the things that we're doing. So the inclusion of open source software in the products that we use, going from frequent to not at all, to almost in every single package that we're deploying. The second shift, especially in IT, is looking at their risk analysis from a perspective other than the data that it uses. So you look at a lot of the kind of risk evaluation type of priorities, those supply chain type attacks are bringing them to, okay, what does the function of this system do for me? It doesn't consume any PII. It's not regulated by any type of kind of government regulation when it comes to data. So those things kind of fell under the radar when it came to security protection because they weren't processing data, which was the key thing that people were looking for. So now people are starting to kind of pick up the fact that what does this system do for me? And how risky is it overall? What kind of access does it have? What kind of data does it consume, even if it's not covered by some sort of regulation? So that is another good thing. In the OT world, we're also becoming more accepting of shipping our data off to other people for analysis. So you have machine learning and AI, the new buzzwords kind of in high technology. What can these other providers do with our data because they're taking in data from a bunch of other different companies? And how can they help us be more efficient, use less resources, do maintenance on time, et cetera. So we're getting more and more comfortable as organizations with shipping that data off and then acting on the decisions that those people give us. So that's yet another shift. Unfortunately, some of the things that have not changed is that your organizational maturity when it comes to cybersecurity is very much dependent on leadership. And it's very much facilitated by regulation. Mr. Walker talked about this a little bit already. Regulation is the big stick that moves the needle when it comes to cybersecurity activities. Despite best efforts as an industry, for us to say you should do security because it's the right thing to do is not exactly the the driver that we would like it to be. Does that change across organizations? Absolutely does, but not always. So that's a couple of the changes across the industry. So a couple of other transitional stuff I wanted to highlight more specifically. So supply chain cybersecurity is just another name for your secure software development lifecycle or your system development lifecycle. And unfortunately, a lot of organizations are still having trouble with the left side of this model, which is making sure we're not building security vulnerabilities into our products, make sure we are putting the right requirements down before we build our product in order to make sure it's secure, and understanding what our customers need. So in the OT world, this is not really a new thing. Back when the WIB put out the process control requirements for vendors, that was centered around, as an end user, these are the things that I need from you in order to do the security things I have to do inside my operation. So outside of the OT world, or people that are familiar with 62443 and the WIB, that was not really a huge concept, and a lot of people are kind of struggling with that. Now we're getting to the point where we want to see assurance that your cybersecurity activities that you have in your SDLC were completed. We want to see chain of custody for all the software that goes into your product. And we have a lot of questions when it comes to what is going to happen with that data. So we also have the second one that's kind of part of that. Let's go. Is how many people have heard of SBOM or CBOM, software bill of materials or cyber bill of materials? We're kind of struggling with that as a industry because everybody knows that they want it. Everybody that knows that they need it, which is basically a list of all the software that makes up your product. But it's bringing with it a lot of questions about what are we going to do with that data when we get it? So and how far does that list need to go? Do you need the hardware blocks inside the silicon that I have on the PCB for that product? Is that how far you want it to go? What drivers we have, what versions of those drivers? What about a proprietary code that we write? How do we kind of transmit that? And as an end user, do you need something like a software bill of materials when it's addressed by a regulator? Let's take the FDA, for example. FDA requires a vulnerability management plan and your cyber bill of materials in order for kind of sign off to sell your product. So if they've done that as an end user, do you still need that as well? So it's bringing up a lot of questions about what we're going to do with it. And it gets kind of difficult when it comes to the actual volume of what you're going to get out of that cyber bill of materials. So 508 commercial components on average per code base. And you have more than 50 CVD entries per day. So we have 508 packages or components per code base, and we're just talking about software at this point. We're not even talking about the hardware. Plus 50 plus CVEs per day, and 75% of orgs on the software development side of the house take more than a week to remediate vulnerabilities. So with that kind of volume, if you're the end user and you're also monitoring the packages that I tell you are inside my piece of software, you're looking at those for vulnerabilities. And then you come to the vendor to say, hey, we noticed that this problem existed. You know, who manages what? What kind of response are you going to expect? There's tons of questions around this product or this process that we're trying to introduce into the world. And that's not it. So CVD and National Vulnerability Database and CVEs are not the be-all, end-all for incidents. So you have things like attacking the development environment, things like typo squatting, dependency confusion, et cetera, where folks are actually attacking your development pipeline and trying to take over the source packages. So each component could be broken down into 5, 6, 10, 15 other subcomponents that may just come off the internet. So you have lots of orphan packages with 50,000 dependencies that haven't been touched in years. Somebody picks it up on GitHub, makes some changes, puts in something malicious, and next thing you know, it's in 15,000 products. So it's a really significant problem to overcome. So some of the key decision points when it comes to scope and focus. This is such a big concept. It was really hard for me to come up with like, hey, what's happening in the industry right now because the supply chain issue is so big. So I just wanted to touch on a couple of the high level things from a product vendor perspective and talk a little bit about some of those, how to move forward. So picking which persona you're going to address and who's going to handle it, especially inside highly matrixed organizations, is kind of one of those key decision points. Do I want to handle this as a consumer, and who's going to handle that? Whose responsibility is it going to be to manage my vendors? What am I going to ask them to do? And it's when we make requirements or we make things that they have to adhere to, how am I going to measure it? What's good? Same thing from the producer side. I need to understand what it is my customer wants, what they're going to do with it, so I can meet their needs one time and be able to provide them with the data that's going to satisfy them and the regulators. And who's going to be responsible for it? Is my customer going to monitor this and let me know when there's errors? Is it something I need to do in-house, et cetera? So identifying which of those two personas you want to start with, who's going to be responsible for it, and what measures you want to kind of employ is a key tipping point for a lot of organizations at this point.